Hi everyone, welcome to episode 20. So, drawing near to the end of the series now, I'd say maybe another 5 or 6 episodes still to come. Hope you've been enjoying it thus far. Today, what I'd like to do is get some simple recoil and reload animations going for the gun, and also to just fix up the aiming a little bit. So, I'm just going to go into the spawner and change the enemy count for this wave down to 0 so that I can just sort of test things out without being harassed by loads of enemies. So what I mean by the aim precision is just that the gun is slightly offset from the player's center. So of course it's not aiming exactly at the crosshair center. So just want to rotate it to look at that mouse point. So I'm going to go into the gun script and just create a public method called aim, and that can take in a vector3 for the aim point. And then we just want the gun to look at that point, so we can say transform dot look at aim point. Okay, so we'll want to call that from the player script since that has the mouse input. But as we've been doing in the past, all the input from the player is going to be routed through the gun controller. So in the gun controller, we'll have public void aim, also taking in, of course, vector3 aim point. And this will just, first of all, check if the equipped gun is not null. I'll just copy that from here. And then it will call equipped gun.aim and pass in the aim point. All right, so we can do that call in the player now. So here where we get the mouse point, we can say gun controller.aim and pass in this point. Okay, so if we try that out now, our aiming should be more precise. As you can see, it's looking exactly at the point. One problem is that if we come too close, of course, the gun starts to sort of bend around and do all sorts of wacky things. So we'd like to sort of set a radius, and if the cursor comes too close to the player, then it stops aiming at the cursor. So let's just do a little printout of the distance between the cursor and the player, so we can see at what sort of distance the gun sort of starts behaving weirdly, and we want to cut out the aiming. So when we're doing the distance check, we'll want to ignore the y-axis. So let's just get two vector2s. So we'll have a new vector2 for the cursor position, so that's point.x and point.z, so once again just ignoring the y-axis. And from that we'll subtract a new vector2 for the player's position, so that should be transform.position.x and transform.position.z. Alright, so if we enclose this entire thing in brackets, we can now get the magnitude of this vector, which is just the distance between them. And let's print that out, so print, and enclose all of that in brackets. Okay, so I'm going to go onto my console, and let's see. Okay, so at about, once the value gets less than 1, I'd say it starts rotating too much, so anything greater than 1 is okay. So what we can do is let's just cut out this little distance thing over here. And we'll put that in an if statement. We'll say if that distance is greater than that threshold distance, 1, only then will we actually aim. And just because square magnitude is a little bit faster than plain old magnitude, we'll use that. And 1 squared is still 1, so we can just leave that. And let's now save and see how that's looking. Okay, so we've bypassed that problem. That's nice. So the next thing to do is some little recoil animation. So I'm going to do that in the gun script. So how this is going to work is in the shoot method, each time we shoot, we're going to move the gun back a little bit and also maybe rotate it up slightly. So say, for example, transform.localPosition minus equals vector3.forward times some value, say 0.2. Later on, we'll probably want to change this to a random value, so it varies slightly each time. And then now that we've sort of kicked the gun back slightly, we want it to, over time, return back to its original position. So we'll create an update method to do that. So let's just add a comment here. This is to animate the recoil. So we'll say transform.position dot local position is equal to, and we'll use the vector3.smoothDamp function. So we'll pass in the current position, which is of course transform.local position, and our target position, which will be just where it started, vector3.0. And then we need the current velocity of the smoothDamp function. So we just create a little variable here, vector3 recoil smoothDamp velocity. So we never actually set that ourselves. We just pass that as a reference into the smoothDamp function. So ref recoil smoothDamp velocity. And finally a smooth time, which is just sort of how long it's going to take for the gun to return to its original position. So let's say 0.1f for now. So yeah, if we save that and try it out, just press play. You can see the gun is sort of kicking back a little bit, which is nice. I want to do a similar thing to just rotate the gun. So that would be on the x-axis, I think. Yeah, we want to rotate it up like that. So I'm going to create a float over here for the recoil angle. So that would be on the x-axis. And when we shoot, like we set the local position, we're just going to set the recoil angle equal to, we'll say we can add 5 degrees to it each time. And we'll maybe want to cap it at some maximum. So we can say recoil angle is equal to mathf.clamp, pass in the recoil angle, and say somewhere between 0 and 30, for example. We'll want to make all of these things public variables so that we can change them for each gun, but for now let's just hard code those. So then we can say recoil angle is equal to, so we want to reduce the recoil angle back to 0 over time, so it's equal to mathf.smoothDamp, pass in the recoil angle, the target 0, current velocity, so we'll make a float recoil rotation smoothDamp velocity. Okay, so pass that in once again as a reference. And then the time it takes to get back, so I'll just use 0.1 again. Now if we save and try this out, it might not work. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be working. I'm seeing no rotation. And the reason for that is that this aim method, where it's looking at the aim point, is completely overwriting that, since this, of course, sets the rotation. So we can fix that by changing our update method to a late update method, so it executes after this aim method. So let's try that out now. Still not sure if we're getting any rotation. I think perhaps the reason is because I haven't actually set the rotation. That could have something to do with it. So let's say transform.local Euler angles is equal to transform.local Euler angles plus vector3 dot, I want to rotate on the x-axis, so vector3 dot right multiplied by recoil angle. It needs to be rotated negatively, I think, to go up in this case, so I'll multiply it by negative recoil angle, or maybe I can just change this to vector3 dot left. Let's do it that way. Okay, so let's try it out now. And I think it's working. I'm seeing some, yeah, it's definitely working, seeing some rotation there. Just to be completely sure that I'm not imagining it, I'll just change this recoil angle to something like 20, so it should be easily visible. Yeah, it's definitely rotating. Okay, so let's go ahead and just replace these things with some variables. So say a public vector2 for the minimum and maximum sort of kickback, whatever it's called in proper gun terminology. So I'll call this maybe kick min max. So I'll just use the x-axis as the min value and the y-axis as the max value. So over here we could say minus equals vector3.forward times random.range between that kick min max.x and kick min max.y. Okay. And we want to do the same thing for the recoil angle. Public vector to recoil angle min max. And let's also have two public floats. The one for this value over here, the sort of the movement return speed, and the other for this rotation return speed. So let's say recoil move settle speed. I don't know if that makes much sense. And public float recoil rotation settle speed. Yeah, those, or instead of speed, it should actually be time, in fact. Okay. Those names could maybe do with a little bit more thought, but it's okay for now. So I'll paste those in here. That's the settle time, and this is the rotation settle time. Okay, and we can use our other variable over here, random.range, recoil, what did I call it? Something to do with rotation. I can't remember. Oh, was it angle? That was it. Recoil angle min max.x, recoil angle min max.y. Great. I'd like to give those some default values, actually. So let's say this is equal to 0.1. This is equal to 0.1 as well. This can be equal to new vector 2, say somewhere between 5 and, or 3 and 5. This is equal to new vector 2 between 0.05 and 0.2. Okay, just guessing some random values there. Let's go back into Unity and just make sure that we haven't broken anything. Nope, it still seems to be working. So if we now just head on over to our gun prefab, we've of course got all of these little variables that we can play with here to affect the behavior of our recoil. I'd like to organize things a tiny bit better though. So let's go back into the gun class and say over here we've got all of our sort of main variables that define the behavior of the gun. Then over here we've got our recoil variables. So let's just add a little header. Give it a name, say recoil. Okay. And then we can maybe call these variables over here. These are kind of like the effects of the gun. So call that effects. And let's see, that should just help a little bit, keep things nice and organized. Okay, so I'd like to get a little reload system working now. So of course we're going to want to have an int for the number of projectiles that we can store in a single magazine. So let's say projectiles per mag, and somewhere down here we can have an int for the number of projectiles currently remaining in the magazine. Okay, and in the start method we'll just want to set the remaining count equal to the number per mag. Okay, so then each time we shoot, we'll first of all want to check if the remaining count is greater than 0. Okay, and then in this little for loop where we shoot all of the projectiles, we'll say that the number of projectiles remaining in the mag gets reduced by 1 each time. And we can say at the top that if the projectiles remaining in mag is equal to 0, then we just want to break out of the loop. Okay, so let's go up here and create a bool to keep track of whether or not we are currently reloading. bool is reloading, and of course we don't want to be able to shoot if we're currently reloading, so we'll say if not is reloading and the rest of the stuff. So we'll create now a public void so that we can start a reload, and we also want a coroutine to actually animate that reload over time. So IE numerator animate reload, like so, and the reload method will quite simply just call the animate reload coroutine. So start coroutine animate reload. Okay, so at the top of this we'll say is reloading is equal to true, and at the bottom, after we finish animating, we'll say is reloading is now equal to false, and our projectiles remaining in the magazine is equal to the full magazine. Okay, so I'd like to have a slight pause. Once we call the reload method, say it pauses for 0.2 of a second, so yield return new wait for seconds 0.2. Okay, and then it can actually start the reload animation. So we'll want to have a float % for how far into the animation we are, and we'll have a while loop. While % is less than 1, since when it's equal to 1, we finish the animation. And we can have a float reload speed is equal to, let's go up to the top and create a public float reload time. Okay, so maybe a normal reload takes 0.3 of a second. So the speed will simply be 1 divided by the reload time. So then inside of the while loop, we'll of course want to say % plus equals time.delta time multiplied by the reload speed. Okay, and we'll want to have our yield return null, so it waits until the next frame before continuing the while loop. So we want to animate the gun simply rotating up and then rotating back down again. So we want a value that as % goes from 0 to 1, that value goes from 0 to 1 and back to 0. So we had a similar thing in our enemy script in one of the early episodes. What's that error message that I was getting there? Oh, this should have double parentheses there. Okay. So let's open up the enemy script so I can show you what I'm talking about. In the attack method, we had this thing over here, this float interpolation, and we had this parabola that we're calculating over here to just go from 0 to 1 and then back to 0. I'm just going to copy that and use it in the gun class over here. So just paste that in, float interpolation, and we can now use that to set our current reload angle. So let's say float reload angle is equal to mathf.lerp from 0 to our max reload angle, which is a variable we'll create just now, using interpolation as our %. So since interpolation goes from 0 to 1 back to 0, our reload angle will go from 0 to max reload angle back to 0. Okay, and so now we just need to set our actual rotation to that reload angle. So we can say transform dot local Euler angles is equal to the rotation at the start of the animation, so initial rot, which is a variable we'll also create in a moment, plus vector3 dot left multiplied by the reload angle we calculated. Oops, reload angle. Okay, let's create those two variables in red. So vector3 initial rotation is equal to transform.local Euler angles at the start of the coroutine, and then the float max reload angle, let's say it rotates 30 degrees. Okay, let's try that out. So we'll want to reload automatically if we detect that we have no projectiles remaining in the magazine. So we can say if we're not already reloading, and if our projectile remaining in mag count is equal to 0, then we can call the reload method. We'll also want to be able to call this from the player script, say if the player presses the R key, for example. So we'll go into our gun controller, and as we have in the past, we'll create a public void reload method here, and we'll check if the gun's not null, and then call reload. Okay, and then we can call that from the player script, which is over here. So here by our weapon input, we can just say if input.getKeyDown, say keycode.r, then we call guncontroller.reload. All right, let's try that out. So let's go into our gun prefab, and we'll want to set our projectiles per mag, let's say 10 perhaps. So now if we press play, we should shoot 10 and then do that reload. So that looks quite nice. You can also press R at any time to do the reload. We could maybe just stop it from reloading if the magazine is currently full. So back in the gun class, this reload method can say if, first of all, we're not already reloading, and if our remaining number of projectiles is not equal to the full number of projectiles per magazine. Okay, so in that case, we start our new animation. And just to be safe, perhaps when we're aiming, we can say that we don't set the aim if we are currently reloading, just so that there's no chance of that ever overwriting our reload animation. Cool, so that should be all working nicely, and yeah, I think we'll leave this episode there, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.